Augeri of DriveSpotter. Did I kill your name? Augeri?
Augeri.
Well, you see, I don't have the accent. I can't do it. DriveSpotter is was with the inaugural class of the Global Insurance Accelerator. Mm-hmm. And I thought I'd start out, because that's how we met.
Yes.
So if you would, just real briefly, how did you get to the Global Insurance Accelerator? How'd that happen?
It's a great question, Mike. First of all, everyone, thanks for coming out. It's great to be back. It has been about 2 years. I actually remember Casey being up here, so it's definitely been a while for us. In terms of how we started, I was driving home one day across I-80 and was running a tech analytics company. We did consulting for people. Nearly fell asleep at the wheel. And I happened to have a video analytics background. I'd done a lot of work with drones on active duty, started reaching into my network. We filed a patent application in response to the federal government's SBIR program, if anyone's familiar with that. And Brian Ardinger, out in Nebraska, happened to know Tej, heard what we were up to in driver safety. The GIA was just getting started, and so we were introduced. Came out the day before Thanksgiving of 2014 to meet with Tej, not ever actually having stopped in Des Moines in my life.
Really?
No. I'd always passed through personally, and so.
And you live nearby.
And I did. I lived all over the U.S., but Iowa had always been kind of like an A to B place for us. And the next thing I know, a month later or 2 months later, here I was living in Des Moines, and we've been part of the Des Moines and frankly Iowa ever since.
Yeah, you have employees here now.
We have employees and contractors here. They're all coding right now, so that's why they're not with us right now. And I'll be in Iowa City over the weekend. We were in Grinnell yesterday. We've got some folks that we're beginning work with in Council Bluffs.
Great.
So for us, Iowa, both in every capacity, has been central to our story.
Yeah, it really has. So with that, would you please tell people what DriveSpotter is and what you do without getting to the because it gets pretty interesting. It's detailed.
Yes. So very simply what we do is we take dash cam video and we turn it into maps. So if any of you are familiar with Waze, we're basically a Waze Plus, right? So instead of it just being your cell phone signal that's telling people how the car is moving, we are actually using machine learning software on top of the video and then providing a map layer to people like Apple Maps or MapQuest, but then also, and basically to update drivers in real time. There's a safety score that we do, and so that's where the fleets and the insurance companies all get interested, along with the vehicle OEMs, which is what we were doing up in Techstars Mobility this summer in Detroit. So yeah, we build maps.
You do a lot more than build maps.
We do, but fundamentally we build maps.
So your first customer was a trucking company, if I remember right.
Yes, Voss Distributing right here in town. So Voss Distributing, they have about 50 straight trucks. They distribute Red Bull all over. They own all of the distribution for Iowa and Missouri. And Zach Voss had he wanted to improve his operations from an efficiency perspective, and he brought us in to look at, was there a way that we could minimize can damage based on drivers making hard turns and hard brakes? And we started putting cameras in his trucks, and we've been working with him ever since.
And so talk about that. So you've got a camera in the truck. Now Voss Distributing, or whoever the customer is, has all this data. What are they doing with it? Are they just beating on people? Or what do they do, right?
If they're using our competitors, then they're just beating on people.
They're beating on people.
That's why they're coming to us. So we have a progressive driver training program. So think if anyone's taken martial arts or any sort of progressive system, basically we take all the different types of behavior. So we take follow distance or lane departures or passing performance, break them down into, is this going to lead to a severe accident? What's the complexity of retraining the driver? And then basically bake out a training program and an incentive program, cash incentive program with those drivers. So, and so now as they're bringing those costs of the fleet down, fuel costs, breakage costs, wear and tear costs, share some with the drivers. They, of course, give us some in return for helping them, and then they keep some.
So they're basically incenting. Did we lose our sound? Okay, you guys still hear us? Something changed in my ears, sorry. So they're basically incenting them to do better, and they're giving them a motivation.
Yep. So, we score good and bad behavior.
Good and bad.
Yeah, so it's like a carrot and a stick. So most competitors, they'll give you, hey, you had a lane departure. But they won't ever say this person actually tracked the lane properly. One of the best examples is passing. So you take a bridge, a pass, a merging. You don't want anybody passing near those locations. But if you look at just telemetry data, well, they stayed in the lane and life was good, or they didn't stay in the lane. But we actually track it down to what's the location of the pass.
Okay.
And so now we can score that this was a good pass or a bad pass.
All right.
Right? And there isn't a competitor on the market that's doing that.
All right. So from a mapping standpoint, can you talk a little bit about they'll use it in the mapping world for? I mean, what, publicly, I mean, some of the stuff is probably
Yeah.
kept confidential, but
I'll give a very local example.
Yeah.
And I forget which street this is. So the last time I was in Des Moines, I want to say it's Grand or Locust. There's some construction going on.
Yeah.
And I hadn't been back in like 2 months. And so I'm driving down, and all of a sudden there's a construction, and I don't know about it. Well, DOTs don't always accurately track where the current construction zones are, right? The maps are just a hair outdated. So imagine having a few hundred trucks all over Des Moines that have our cameras. We can update that stuff every day in real time.
okay. So
And that's just construction zones.
okay.
What's the condition of all the pothole covers, the fire hydrants, the billboards, what's on the billboards, right? You pick an object you're looking at and you want to see it, and you have a reason for using that inside of your business. That's what we provide.
All right, great. So what did you get out of the GIA? You came here with more than an idea. You guys were a little ways down the road, if I remember right.
I had a patent application.
You had a patent application, and that was it.
A failed government proposal.
Failed. Yeah, okay, well,
I came here with failure.
failure is part of startups.
Failure,
Failure. That's just part of the game. So what happened in that 100 days that you were here, January to May or whatever that was? What did you get out of it? What benefited you? Be selfish.
Yeah. For us, I think the biggest thing is always be learning. So we came here, we're here for 100 days. Within the first week, I go from building a hardware company to building a software company, because we had investors and mentors tell us, hey, it's going to cost you $25 million to build this driver-facing camera with a wearable that's going to wake the driver up. Right? So we get all this feedback. I go home, we come back, pivot the entire company within a week. And then from there, we just continue to interact with mentors. And sometimes that lasted long range. I remember your specific feedback to me was all around me owning the revenue model. And you may recall that I kind of resisted that.
Yes, you did.
And I handed it off to Andrew. And fortunately, we learned something, because now I do own it in a certain sense, and I'm head of sales. But it took me a little while to appreciate the feedback, right? And so some things, you learn quickly, and other things you take a little longer to learn.
Yeah, but that's part. I mean, but at the same time, you were getting a lot of feedback.
A lot of feedback. It's all about the feedback. Like, yeah, we got 40K in capital. That was wonderful. If you want to make it 80K next year, I'm sure all the next class will appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the idea.
But
more money, huh?
well, obviously you'll own more of the company, so there's upside for you.
Well, I'm not the investor, but no, I think one of the things that's hard that a lot of people don't understand is in that first 3 weeks, you meet almost 100 mentors.
You do.
And that's going on this week at the GIA. They just started again. And in fact, I have a meeting right after this.
Yeah, we were there
mentors.
last night. We kind of gave some thoughts at the highlight dinner, the opening dinner.
And there's something called mentor whiplash, which is where 6 mentors give you feedback on the exact same issue, and they tell you 6 different things, and they're all diametrically opposed. And that's just, what do you do? So it's not fair to say, why didn't you take my advice or whatever? As a mentor, you can't do that, because you don't know all the different advice.
Yeah, it was more of I had to appreciate it, right?
Well, it's called internalizing something.
Yeah, there's internalization. So the mentors were hugely helpful, right? And then the fleet introductions, right? So Brian Hemisath, who runs the program, is the managing director. He was very helpful in, for instance, getting us connected to Boss. We had people connect us into Ruan, CRST, all across Iowa. And I think that's one of the, part of what we didn't realize when we came here. I've lived in 15 different states. I'm ex-military, 12 years, lived all over the country, 3 times in Texas alone, right? So I've lived in a lot of places overseas and the U.S. And I did not realize the extent to which Iowa is connected.
Yeah.
And in a very solid way. And so there was a lot of benefits that were not even apparent. And I think that's kind of there's more opportunity than is there at first blush. And I think that's something that Iowa has that I haven't really seen.
I think a
anywhere
lot
else.
of people don't appreciate the fact that what it means to have I-35 and I-80 intersect. When I used to do a lot of work with UPS, they were one of my big customers, and I got an education in logistics really fast.
Yeah,
and I had it explained to me just what the value of that 20-mile radius area called Des Moines really is, simply from a logistics standpoint, just because of the number of trucks moving through, the number of companies.
Yeah, there's reasons we have a lot of our operations in Nebraska, Iowa.
Exactly.
We briefly made a foray into Kansas City. We're going to have to regroup on that one.
All right. So you left the GIA in May 15th?
May 27th or so. My birthday was like the next day. It was great.
You raised a round.
We did. The round officially opened, so we raised $750,000 after the GIA. That round was formally announced. Matt Patain, by the way, that was March maybe we announced it of last year. But yeah, we raised the money in July of 15, but the announcement itself didn't even come out until March. Yeah.
But it's, the investors don't always want to talk about what they've done.
There was some investor delay, It was a rolling round,
was a
right?
rolling
So there's some dirty secrets that people don't like to talk about, how hard it is to fundraise, and it's very challenging, right? You have to convince someone to take their hard-earned money or their team's hard-earned money and put it into your company,
Yeah.
and you're pre-revenue. So the idea of raising $750,000
That's
pre-revenue
really hard
is
to do.
really, really hard, and I was an unknown quantity, right? I mean, no one in Iowa knew me.
Right.
Prior to coming here. So there was a lot of things we had to do with traction, working with people like David Miles and some of the other mentors that were associated with the GIA of, just tune this to this, get product feedback, work with customers. It was hard.
Can you say who led you around?
Grinnell Mutual. So for those of you familiar with Grinnell, Iowa, Grinnell Mutual Reinsurance Company, which is one of the founding partners of the GIA, led our rounds. They continue to work with us very closely,
Right.
Both from a investor perspective, but then also their insurance company, so the extent to which they can benefit from our product out there in the marketplace, just like some of the other insurance companies are working with us.
Yeah, no kidding. So how'd you end up in Detroit? Because the next thing we all knew is you ended up in a Techstars accelerator in Detroit. So it's not common to do two accelerators back to back, I don't think. So tell us about that.
So for me, I'm a big fan of ecosystems and I'm a big fan of verticals, right? So we came to the GIA because it was insurance centric and the ecosystem is really strong in insurance, right? The insurance capital of the US, right? And Hartford tries to compete with that, okay? So we got a lot of cohesive mentorship. It was like we get money, but we get this very cohesive mentorship, right? We're strong in insurance, and by extension, we were beginning to become strong in warranty service, which is of interest as the autonomous vehicles come into play.
Sure. Yeah.
Right, so we've got this covered in some sense. But we're putting cameras in vehicles, and they're all aftermarket. And at some point, I don't want them to be aftermarket, but I also don't want to be a hardware company.
Right.
So the easiest way to do that is to cozy up to OEMs and suppliers and say, look, you all have hardware, you're used to putting cables and harnesses and cameras and sensors inside of vehicles. We're really good at writing software, so maybe we can do some business together. Now we went there. For us, I did not go there expecting to shift our business model.
Really?
That was unexpected. So perhaps the most interesting nuance, and I'll hold depending on which questions you had coming, but basically we went there thinking we were an event recorder. So we go there, we've got cameras, and we're creating this highlight reel of all these driving events. We weren't thinking about maps. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have said what we do is help commercial fleets save money.
You used to tell people that, I remember that.
I did for a very long time. And Selena, when we initially hired her, that was, as our marketing director, that's what, she was focused on helping me get that message out.
Right.
So we go to Detroit in June, and on demo day, September 8th, I get up on stage, and I'm like, yeah, so we're a dynamic mapping company. And people are like, well, what happened?
Yeah.
Well, it's the same exact data. We're doing the same exact machine learning, but instead of saying, here's a highlight reel of driving behavior, watch a video, it's we've taken the video and created a map for you. And now all of a sudden, everybody got it. Like, everybody wants a map. I want to get them, I want to get there faster, cheaper, safer, and a map is what helps you do that.
Interesting. So that's, I think a lot of people who have not done a startup, that's a real pivot. I mean, it's in the sense of you didn't have to change your product, but just your entire...
All the messaging.
All the messaging.
Throw away all the marketing material.
Right. So everything we told our team...
Yeah, there was team dynamics as well.
Right. Yeah, we're not here, we're over there. And you had to keep the existing customers because you didn't get rid of all your customers.
Oh, no, you don't want to do that, right?
Yeah.
There was some remessaging with everyone.
And how did their customers that had already bought it based on helping driver safety, how did they buy into it? Or did they?
So it was a shift in perception and it was a shift in the actual user interface, right? So we went from saying, here's the video front and centric and the maps off to the side to the maps front and centric, and by the way, there's video if you want to watch it.
Okay.
Right, so we presented it to them in a way where it's like you can look at more data all at once.
I see.
Right, but I will say that part of what we do is do case studies with our customers.
Right.
Right, so we have 3 fleets that are in the food and beverage space. Okay. So we're working through a number of case studies specific to food and beverage.
Right.
And so we already have this close working relationship. We're going to roll out a new feature. What do you think? Here's a couple different options we can pick from. So there's already a close working relationship. And so I think that's part of the secret to startups is those early customers build those close working relationships because it's going to happen. You have to expect that you're going to change and you possibly may change dramatically. And so just being used to that possibility.
It's what kills a lot of startups is when they refuse to change.
It almost killed us twice.
It's like, oh no, this is who we are. Leave me alone. We're right here. And it's like, yeah, the market went over there. And so
Yeah. If I had not had so much feedback on the hardware idea sucked on day one, week one of the GIA,
I think I was one of the people telling you.
you probably were.
Well, I used to be in the hardware business, so
I recall some of that conversation.
Yes.
It wasn't, I was like, oops,
Yeah.
this isn't the best idea. But it was so intense, I was able to kind of get past my own ego that day or that week. But like going to Techstars, we did not expect, it was just very unexpected that we would shift the
So tell us about
positioning of the company.
the Techstars you were in was around transportation,
Mobility, yep, mobility.
and that's in Detroit.
That is in Detroit, which again is a vertical ecosystem.
Right.
So we have another team we're building up there. So here is an insurance and web developer team.
Right.
Omaha is fleet operations, customer support, and web development. Detroit is take any vehicle data you want, plus sales engineering and distribution, right? So those, because that's key, all of that talent is right there in Detroit.
How are you running 3 locations? Who's running it?
So one of the dirty secrets of my life is I travel a lot.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was in Detroit, here for 2 days. I'll be in Omaha for 2 days. I'll be back here Friday, and I'll be in Detroit on Wednesday.
So you're just going to keep going in the circle, or are you going to?
No, I was down in Austin for 10 days. I was in Detroit for a week and a half. So some weeks it spurts. So part of,
But at some point, are you going to put a layer of management in to run it?
Oh, I'm starting to do that.
Okay.
The next generations, so I'm starting to hand off and delegate certain things where I don't need to be there as much. I tend to try to flurry it up. So like, hey, I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks.
So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? You deal well with letting go of control?
Not always.
Not always?
Yeah.
That's good honesty. I like it.
Part of it is just building in feedbacks,
Yeah.
right? So like we're big on Slack, which is a data, in the moment communication tool.
Right.
We're very big on sort of constructive criticism. So any, like if I mean from day one, especially after our experience with the first week at the GIA, it's like, we'll walk out of here and somewhere between now and when we get in the car to our next meeting, Selena and Andrew and I will have a debrief on, hey, what made sense, what didn't make sense, right? So we bake that into every aspect. And because we can do it so well in person, it also translates well to Slack or on the phone. Like Andrew and I had a pretty, hardball conversation. I was in Detroit this week, and there was a conversation we had to have, and it was because we've baked that into the team, right? Hey, how do you feel about this? What's going on? What am I not understanding? It's relationship building. It's no different than your personal life, right? Like, my girlfriend and I were on the road. She's got her travels, I've got mine, and it's the same kind of concept. It's just that mapping that feedback and that sort of relationship building into the work life.
Yeah, I think that's, again, I think in the startup world, that's one of the things I see a lot is the challenge when you suddenly can't manage everything yourself. You've got to have some people managing the managers, managing the doers, simply because you're ignoring them too much if you don't.
Oh yeah, so like Andrew's running operations, which includes customer support.
Right.
I only get involved if there's a relationship management concern with the customer.
Right.
And then I come in as the account executive, if you will.
Yep, that sounds good. Let's open it up for questions. What kind of questions do we have out there today? There's one.
Sir?
I just want a clarification. You talked about patent initials out there.
Oh, SBIR?
What is it?
SBIR.
SP.
Small Business Innovation Research. So that's the small business version only, and then there's STTR, which requires university participation. Every major federal agency is required to set aside 1%. I believe it's 1% of their R&D budget, and allocated to small businesses. So you're familiar with like Lockheed Martin, perhaps. So they're a prime. Small business would be a subcontractor to them. This allows the small business to gain expertise in being a prime on the contract, and then eventually. So I had actually managed a $3.5 million program of that size. We had like 15 different contracts down in Austin for a couple of years. So I'm intimately familiar with it. And then when I moved back to the Midwest, did so on the university side as well, same type of research.
The Iowa Innovation Corp here in Iowa has a person full-time that works with entrepreneurs on SBIRs and STTR grants. It's an amazing program. I have one client that's received over $1 million of grant money. It's a very rigorous program. You're not going to get it easily. You have to know what you're doing. But it's a huge jumpstart to a technical company.
$100,000 phase one for 6 months. So usually 1 to 2 people can be supported because there's the way the government does it's over it. There's just some interesting numbers.
Yeah.
And then $1 million phase, $750,000 to $1 million phase two for 2 years. depending on the DoD agencies.
Yeah, it is. It's truly an amazing program. You have to really hit on what they're trying to do, but I've seen some amazing success stories come out of that program. So, unfortunately, the press likes to rip up the bad news, but there's a lot of good news in there.
Yeah.
So,
That's actually, I want to touch on that, turning failure into success, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we had a failed application, and there are opportunities in startups. I mean, Selena and I go through this conversation all the time. There are a lot of things we apply to that we don't expect to win.
yeah,
And the only reason I invest the energy is I have a second win that I can count on.
yeah,
Right? So if we do an SBIR proposal now, we only do it if we feel we have a patent application we can immediately file.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not worth the energy burn.
yeah,
And that's been one of our secret tricks, if you will,
yeah.
tricks of the trade.
Well, and you do. You have to plant more seeds than you plan to have grow up because it doesn't always work out. Other questions? You guys are quiet. Yeah, in the back.
When you talk about pivot on the DriveSpotter app,
Yes.
was it tougher to sell that pivot to the internal team, or was it tougher to sell it to external customers?
Good question.
Why don't you restate the question?
Yep. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, when we had a pivot, was it harder to sell it internally to the team or externally to customers, investors, distribution partners, whomever? So we've had 3 major pivots, I would say. One was the hardware to software pivot. The second was the commodity hardware to mobile app pivot. And the third was really the marketing shift that we had over the summer. Early on, it was just me and Andrew, so that was pretty easy. Actually, the hardest thing I had to do at that moment, because the second week at the GIA, Grinnell Mutual had already expressed a pretty strong interest in us, and I remember Kurt Eves comes in the first week, and then all the rest of Grinnell comes in the second week. And every single one of the people from Grinnell, I said, what I'm telling you is not what I told Kurt. I need you to go back and tell Kurt that we're a software company, not a hardware company. So we did experience that was the only real hurdle. Brian Hemisath was happy because we were a success story because we had taken feedback from mentors.
Yep.
So that was that one. The second one honestly it was actually the customers selling us. So this was an interesting one. Now, as I'm reflecting on this in the moment here, the customers were telling us, look, I really appreciate that you're not custom hardware and our commodity hardware, but at the end of the day, we're not going to pull these chips out of the cameras and mail them back to you Netflix DVD style. That was what we would tell these customers,
I know,
right?
I remember.
Including Zach Voss. And Zach was on board with us prototyping it.
Oh, he was.
And so, the customers actually had to sell us about this. You have to do something else, right? So we had to listen to the feedback. And then once we said, well, we're going to do a mobile app, they're like, yay! They didn't know what the solution was. They just knew that they didn't want to pull chips out of their trucks. So that was them selling us. The third one was right at the end of the summer because we weren't planning on a pivot, right? I was literally sitting with a guy named Matt Ross. There was this moment of oops, it's right in front of me to be a mapping company. I was probably most concerned about selling our investors. I was most concerned about selling our investors. I don't know that it was actually harder to sell them. Everyone loved it, so there was an OEM, and their venture arm had been tracking us the whole summer. And they came up to me at the end of demo day, pushing people out of her way. She has her business card all written up. She's like, Chris, I didn't understand what you were doing when you came to Detroit. You're an event recorder. You're a mapping company? Yeah, I got this machine learning group. I need you to talk to them, boom, boom, boom. So I don't know that there was, frankly, Selena, do you have thoughts about having to reposition it? Because it's a marketing thing we've had to do.
Yeah, I think for what we were doing at Techstars at the time, because it was actually pretty close to demo day, so
Yep.
that was the internal hurdle.
There was some internal hurdles. There was.
So we've got this. I would do marketing too, so I was I got our slide deck ready, and then Chris comes out of that conference room and is like, we're a mapping company now. So there was the internal hurdle.
She was a little upset.
Hurdle of that wow, we're gonna have to review the slides now. But it was, big picture, we all realized this opens up so many doors
If you
for
don't
us.
like rapid change, startups
Yeah.
aren't a great place to be.
Yeah, but just like anything we do, it's worth the extra hours
Yeah.
to get the slides done, spend some more time on the marketing for
Yeah.
us. Because
There was
that's
some
what we
internal.
wanted was to be able to say we were a mapping company
Yep.
in front of that audience. So we just made it happen.
Yeah, and even our other people in the cohort, we got on stage and they didn't know what we were up to. We didn't tell anybody. We had told Ted Serbinsky, who was Brian Hemisath's counterpart up there. Yeah, you're right. The internal team management was the hardest part. My biggest concern was our investors, but the hardest part was the internal team. Now that
People get pretty vested.
and it's a high tempo, right? It's the last week. We've been there for 100 days. We're all away from home.
Total burnout.
So we're putting 20-hour days in. I mean, pretty much 20-hour days in. I'm not making that up. So
Todd, you had a question.
Yeah, I was going to ask just about the competitive landscape. How far into this you were,
yeah.
kind of where you stood.
So in terms of so from a
What's your competitive landscape look like?
yeah. So for years, people have been doing GPS tracking of vehicles, right? You see the domes on top of trucks and cars and those sorts of things. So asset tracking of that nature, where it's like, here's the vehicle and this is the direction it's moving, we complement and build right on top of that. So one of our strongest partnerships is with Verizon Wireless. They transport cellular data. That's where the partnership started. They own 4 telematics companies that do basically GPS tracking of vehicles, none of which do video. So if you have a driver who's had a hard break and all you have is dots on a map, you can't have a conversation around, well, I got cut off by this red Honda Prius, right? And that suddenly slowed down. Whereas the video allows them to do that. So Verizon's very interested in putting our video on top of that. So relative to asset tracking, GPS-based systems were very complementary. And in fact, our platform is specifically designed to integrate with them. So they're really much more of a partner and distribution channel opportunity, even though most people think of them as a competitor initially. Then if you take competing camera solutions, right? So prior to Techstars, our traditional competitors would have been companies like Lytx, SmartDrive, and Mobileye, all of which are custom hardware companies. Hardware is going to cost $1,000 or more, and it's an event recorder of some sort. Now that we've repositioned the company, our competitors, so for instance in Iowa, Here.com is mapping part of Iowa. They're a direct competitor to us. They're obviously much bigger, have raised a lot more money. We differentiate ourselves in a variety of ways, one of which is we do insurance plus the OEMs, right? So we do a mixture of relationships that they don't support. We've been very careful about our strategic investment, right? So we tend not to take strategic investment, if you will. It's much more of institutional investment, which allows us to be that third-party auditing and mapping company. So there's different ways. So Here.com, N-Auto would be another competitor. Selena or Andrew, I think, is there any other major ones that I'm missing?
That pretty much covers it.
Yeah.
At least the broader categories.
Yep. Yeah.
Do you see anybody coming at you? Is there somebody who'd be coming behind you you're thinking about that you think's coming up on you? Because you've got a kind of unique position.
Right.
You position yourself well.
Yeah. So I would say that the most direct competitor at our current scale, who I sometimes wonder if they're like listening in on our conversations based on their marketing material. So N-Auto, literally you could watch N-Auto and be like, oh, that's DriveSpotter from California. I mean, so in that sense, we pay some attention to them. In terms of at scale, Here.com or Mobileye, and Here.com and Mobileye have started to partner up, but historically they're more of a European play.
Okay.
And so we have some things that we do in terms of our sales and expansion strategy, partnerships that we work that are designed to address those.
Yeah, Casey.
First, congrats.
Thank you, Casey.
Second, can you talk a little bit about where you think this would have been had you not done the accelerator?
Where would this be if you had not done those 2 accelerators?
That's a good question.
It is a good question.
I did.
Personal sacrifice to be away from your day stuff.
Yeah. So, veteran for 12 years, academics for about the same amount of time, had run my own company, which was actually, frankly, failing at the time. So I was actually pretty close to calling it quits on entrepreneurship. And probably within 90 days of that. So I don't know that it would be anywhere, frankly. I might have reattempted on the SBIR, right? You can always take feedback and reapply to a program like that. I don't know that I would have gotten the feedback fast enough to have made a difference, right? So that's the beauty of an accelerator, right? It accelerates, people think of it accelerating your growth. I think the more important thing it does is accelerate your feedback. Right? It's that ability to have dialogue. That ability to have dialogue meaningful dialogue with people that have experience in your space, that was probably the most valuable takeaway, and that's what allowed us to move so quickly. Had I not had that, I don't know that resources would have been there for me to like keep plodding along at it for 5 years or 3 years. And at that point, the landscape would have changed so much that I wouldn't have realized the next pivot like a mapping company. So it's difficult for me to feel like it would be anywhere without the GIA or a similar program, right? And there's certainly other accelerators.
A lot of good accelerators out there. Well, the interesting thing that's happened in the accelerator world in the last 5 years is the focus. We've gone from the generic accelerators 5, 6, 7 years ago, everybody helping everybody, to these very targeted accelerators like mobility.
Yep, and we're huge fans of that. I mean, like if we ever, like that, Andrew and I talk about it all the time. Like at some point, we'll hopefully have some sort of liquidity event that our investors will appreciate, and that we hopefully will have a chance to give back in ways that beyond what we're giving back now, right? So right now, the way we give back is we work locally. We usually within each ecosystem, we have some sort of nonprofit or a similar program where we are working to expand mobility options to people in various socioeconomic classes, right? We have all this mapping data, which means we understand people movement, which means we can give back in certain ways. We're doing it in Detroit, we're doing it in Nebraska, we're doing it in Iowa. I think for giving back at scale relative to startups, it's around how can you build ecosystem, how do you build vertical accelerators within a given relevant ecosystem that allow that entrepreneurial growth? Because the Midwest, it's hard, right? Des Moines has executed it very well relative to both. You've got the GIA, and now you've got the new one, I understand.
We are going to be talking about that soon.
Yeah. So, so I think giving back at that scale would be something that we talk about. We just haven't figured out quite how to do that yet, right? Our revenue's not quite where that would need to be.
Question? Yeah, we're here.
Just a question regarding accelerators. Some announcement today about expansion of a 90-day program or a 100-day program into a 12-month program. Would that have, I'm just curious what startups or entrepreneurs feel about that. Would that just kill you? Would it, what's your
Do you know about what she's talking about?
I do know of one 12-month program. I'm not sure it's the same
Well,
one.
so the Iowa Startup Accelerator over in Cedar Rapids announced that they're going to a 12-month rolling accelerator.
Right.
And I think
I'm
the
familiar
idea
with a
is
similar concept.
you go every Friday.
Right.
There's an all day every Friday, and then it's very radically different. I don't think there's a lot of them out there. I think it's the first or second one I'd heard of to do that.
Yeah, there's a similar program going on in Omaha. So there was a former accelerator that's been merged with the local chamber and one of the startup collaborative spaces that we happen to work out of, and they're doing in this ongoing module-based growth.
Yeah. So what do you
program.
think about those?
So I think I'll connect it with Casey's, and it's all around how fast you can make that feedback loop. So I'm ex-military, right? 12 years. And during Vietnam, people have seen Top Gun, right? Most of us have probably seen Top Gun, right? And they talk about the kill ratio going down during Vietnam. So some people studied it, and what they came up with was this concept of an OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. And this was this framework for fighter pilots to have. Well, he with the tighter OODA loop wins. And so it's the same concept in feedback. So the extent to which you go from a 3-month targeted high-speed feedback loop to a 12-month extended, as long as that sort of momentum, but that's harder, right? Yeah. It's easy. Like if you leave your home and go away for 3 months, all you have is work, the gym, sleep, occasionally. That's it. That's all that exists, right? We woke up at 6, we would go to the gym at 6:30, and we would come home at basically 9 at night.
Yeah, I know.
And that was 3 months in Detroit, and it was fun.
Right.
You can't maintain that. Like it's harder to maintain that pace when the family and the friends and everyone's not distracting you, but frankly, that's part of life, right? And so it's like boot camp.
It's a very different model.
So it's a different model, and so I think the extent to which they can figure out how to, but you also can't maintain that pace for a year.
No.
Right, like I take my breaks. Like I took a 10-day workcation. So girlfriend and I went down to Austin over the holidays, and we worked and didn't work, to recover. And so I think the extent to which you can keep some sort of really tight feedback loop and really get people to understand that that's what it's really all about, in my mind.
I do think, though, for certain kinds of startups, whether you're doing a new kind of technology and there's a lot of building time involved. If you're building a deep set of code and you know what you're building, I could see where that could work. I don't think there's one perfect model. And I think I know Eric well, the guy that runs that, and he's a brilliant man, and he's got a strong team of people there. So I'm very encouraged to see what they can do with it. I think they deserve accolades for trying it because they're basically taking feedback from every class and saying, how do we do it better next time? And they're not afraid to try something new.
Yeah. To me, that feels more like learning an instrument. Like, how do you stay at the guitar or the drums for a year?
Yeah.
Yep.
You had a question, Christine?
So you mentioned your first company and how it was pretty much failing. What are you taking from that learning experience and applying to not do it?
So the feedback loop's one big lesson. Team, like just making sure that understanding what my own strengths and weaknesses are a little better.
Are you building your team differently?
Yeah. So much more around this is your core area of competency, go out and execute against it and let me get out of the way. I would say focusing more on problem and less on solution. So to put that in perspective, when we started DriveSpotter, we came in and we were doing all this high-speed machine learning, right? Which is great. We could do that, but there was no why, right? So now, like,
This
if you
is
want,
the because we can.
because we can,
Yeah.
right? Because us techies can. I mean, I came in, PhD in comp sci, I'd been building code for years, right? I'm not thinking like a CEO. And so that transition has been an ongoing one, but and I focus on team, sales, and financing now. So I think the extent to which you understand that the product can be very, very simple is what we've really learned, right? If you launch our product now, it's like it's a camera, it's a digital recorder. We happen to have some math behind it, but really all it is an intelligent VCR in some sense.
But it's
So
also-
dumbing that down and solving a real problem is actually what's scaling our
but it
business.
solves a problem people pay
And that's
for.
what people care about, right? So I was focused more on solution.
Been working with closely with a startup, and I've seen them take in lots of competitors, which from my background is huge. However, they're thrashing more than they're deciding. How do you internalize feedback and decide yes, no, and don't allow that weird oscillation that happens when
The hysteresis that you get, it's like setting your temperature, right? Your thermostat, you go, oh, it's 72, oh, now it's 69, right? How did you phrase it? Mentor whiplash?
Mentor whiplash.
Yep. So organization. So there's the whole lean startup model where you have hypothesis testing. So understanding that, like, I used to hate chemistry and physics class, right? It was all about the lab notebook, and I really sucked at the lab notebook, frankly. But if you treat everything in the startup as an experiment and understand that this is our hypothesis, and you can shift the hypothesis, but treat it as a separate experiment, right? So, like, we use Trello to organize certain things. We use spreadsheets to organize others. Andrew's like our number one market rater. I mean, he comes up with stuff. I'm like, how did you even find this, right? And so we're constantly getting this new feedback. If I worried about every time Here.com came out with an announcement, I would just sit in my office and never do anything, right? So it's all around, all across the organization, right? So it's like, here's an experiment in our sales pipeline. Here's an experiment in our product. Here's an experiment with a customer. And so if you can frame it around, experiments and track that, and not get caught up with today we just heard I need to pivot. I mean, it took us 3 months through an entire accelerator, like basically the number one accelerator in the program in the country, and we could have gotten caught up in listening. I intentionally, actually, Andrew and Selena can recall this, they took all these notes, and I'd been through the GIA, and I'm like, I'm not going to respond until the end, right? I'm going to put because otherwise I would just be like,
Well, I think one of the things when I'm working with startups, I say is let the data talk to you. Humans, our emotions can be of great value, but we also get emotionally attached to things, and we're not rational. It's just reality of humans. What makes humans great is they're not machines. But at the same time, if we don't look at data and what a customer is really paying for, not what they're saying, I mean, that's something else you have to separate is what a customer says they want versus what they'll actually buy are very, very different things. But you have to look at the data. You can't just make assumptions. You can't be on an emotional basis. You have to go on what really worked. And that's why you'll hear the words A/B testing and all these different forms of test and measure. are throughout all of these situations, whether it's the lean or
Right.
agile version, whatever, they're all doing test and measure and then looking at the data.
Yeah. Well, you have to keep them separate. So in the math world, we talk about something orthogonal, right? So here's X and here's Y. So the same is true about experiments. So like we have 3 or 4 different case studies going on. Here's one for food and beverage. But like within the product, there's something called driver recap. The driver can push a button and add some audio overlay. We have one fleet that's using it strictly for if something bad happens that the driver wants to capture. We have another fleet using it for route documentation. And here's different things on the route that are important for other drivers to know if they're ever covering my route because I'm out sick or whatever the situation might be. So you have to be able to separate those and then make them as separate as possible. Because otherwise you get caught in that fuzzy gray area. Right? And so that for me has been helpful. Thank you.
It's a quiet room.
I do have one more question.
Go for it.
I hit an edge case that I was thinking about as I was helping startup. They're getting some of their feedback from a future customer who happens to also be an investor.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a weird? I feel like at some level that's kind of a weird position where they have dual problems.
We have at least,
Wanting to make money and giving honest feedback.
so we have 2.5 of those at least in our cap table right now. Grinnell Mutual, which made a massive investment, well over $500,000. We had Voss Distribution, which is also an investor. And then we had a former fleet owner, which still has a familial affiliation with another fleet. Investomer was, we came across that word, we like it.
Investomer.
Investomer.
I like that. Yeah.
And all of them are two of them were customers, 2 of them were investors before they were customers. And one of them's on our board, right? I mean, to talk about like posing potential conflict. And so it was important to separate for them, and sometimes this is ongoing, here's the potential ROI if we scale and if you help us scale. And then here's the ROI in the near term if you deploy our product. And oh, by the way, if you help us scale, we need you to help us go sell this to other insurance companies to expand distribution, which might compete with you, right? So talk about competing goals. And so the way that, so part of our approach is we need this to be replicable and easy so we can get to the quick exit, which, oh, by the way, is where you're going to get the most ROI. And so helping that investor understand that the most ROI is going to come from give us a pilot study that we can go replicate to build distribution and get you the ROI you actually want. And not, yes, the near term's good, but if you invested, then what you're really after, what I would presume you're after, unless there's some other like market positioning thing to look good as a company or something, is really that other ROI, right? So being able to separate and help them understand that it's the distribution that they're helping build has been helpful for us, at least on that side. For the fleets, it's the same. They've invested, and we might be using competing, but inside the product, there are things where they get value from other fleet data. So for instance, here's construction zones from other fleets. So there's a product tier. So now they're competing, but at the same time, it's friendly competition because everybody wants the roads to be safe. So if you can figure out that sort of like, how help me help you.
Yeah, a couple of things I would add. If the customer is acting on behalf of the industry, you're fine. If they're acting in a way that they want you to be their differentiator, not anybody else, that they need to buy your company.
Yep, that's exclusivity.
And sometimes that's a great investor. If the answer is, I want you to do it this way, and you say, great, write me a check for $10 million, and they say yes, that's an exit. And that's a very good exit. The other thing you have to watch for is the level of customers. So let's say you've got a large corporation. Grinnell's pretty good size. There's a lot of people over there. You've got a CEO and an exec team that made the investment. They have their motivations that are very strategic. Now you get a director of ops who is running a new product launch, and her whole career is riding on that launch. She has a very different motivation than the CEO. So they're both valid. But as the owner of the business, you've got to go back to your board and talk to your strategic investors, and they have to handle that in their company.
Yep.
That's their challenge, not yours. And you have to be willing to go back to that person and say, this is not strategic.
And we keep them in the loop. In our case, like we were just at Grinnell this week, and it was PMO, project management office, loss control, underwriting. Oh, by the way, our board delegate, right? So everyone's in the room. They're all hearing the same messaging. They're all hearing the same questions. Here's the product side for you. Here's the investment return. Here's how we scale it up, right? And managing that, right? Because everyone's got expectations. Stephanie?
Expectations, as you corporate
Can you restate
Great.
that?
Yes. So we're a startup. We're moving in different ways, and the corporations we partner with and our investors they're used to working in different ways. And so, how do we bridge the gap between their day to day, how they approach the world, and how we approach the world? Is that roughly?
What do you wish they knew?
Yeah. So I'll speak to it tactically relative to the GIA, and for those of you that are in the insurance community in the room and or associated with the GIA. So for us, it's all about data and speed of iteration, right? So for instance, we have more than one insurance company that's giving us access to redacted data about accidents so we can better understand the sequence in which we should be training drivers. Like, these are our high-risk accidents, right? That's a huge shift for an insurance company, right? To be able to take claims data and redact it in a way that it's legally compliant and then share it with an unknown entity,
Just getting the group to agree that it's
right?
legally compliant.
So like one of my top Brian asked me at the end of the GIA, hey, Chris, what would be better? If every insurance company, if you're a health company, then you've got some health claims data you could have already pre-redacted. They're just ready to go. They could be fake data. It doesn't even matter. It could be like a fake claim report, but just something to help both parties communicate, because that's really what it comes down to, right? So you've got a corporate that operates this way and a startup that operates this way, and how do you equalize that? Well, that comes down to communication, and for us, the communication hinges on data, right? And, oh, by the way, it's capital. So Andrew was coming out on the megabus once every other week. So it's me and a guy wrapping up his MBA on the megabus. And the corporate walks in with 7 people, and I'm like, I understand that we didn't even get our money from the GIA yet. I don't have an intern I can even hire right now, right? So understanding that we're trying to help you, and so the extent to which you can match that in some sense internally is very helpful. Those are probably
Speed of response.
Yep.
Just iteration speed. Where, the corporate world, if you send an email, you'd send it an email on a Monday. If you got an answer by Friday, you'd be good.
Yep.
You and I would have built the whole thing by Friday.
Yeah.
Neither is wrong. There's a reason corporations move at the pace they move. It's not, they're all bad. I used to be part of a 5,000 person corporation, and I know why it moved, the speed it moved. The risk was huge. But if you're going to work with a startup, you're slowing them down by definition if you work at your own pace.
Yeah, well, that's the whole beauty of it. Some big corporates have recognized that it makes more sense for us to create an external startup that we fund than to have a so-called tiger team inside the organization, because they can go move quickly without the bureaucracy
Or the competition with it.
Yeah, we've even run into situations even now where it's we're already creating too much bureaucracy. Let's get rid of this.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly you can.
It can creep in pretty quickly.
There are days you just have to sit back and say, why am I doing this? What's the actual value to the company of doing this versus that? I mean, sometimes you realize, take it off the list. It's just not that valuable. We probably have time for one more question, then we'll wrap it up. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up. Anything else you got that you want to talk about?
Good question.
Can you
Good
stick
question.
around for a few minutes?
I can sort of stick around after if anyone wants to talk one-on-one.
Yeah. Why don't we do that?
That'd be good.
That would be great. Well, thank you.
Thank you for your
I
time.
appreciate
Thank you for coming out, everybody.
it.